In this video, I will discuss terminology, the four principles of Arizona's language development approach, and I will finally end with discussing assessment and placement for students who are English language learners. In the state of Arizona, the definition of a English language learner is an ELL student are those whose native language is not English and who have difficulty reading, writing, speaking, or comprehending English such that it limits success in the classroom. An ESL student is a student who is learning English as a second language. An ESL student is, quote, a student whose primary language or languages of the home is other than English and would require additional English language support to develop reading, writing, listening, and speaking skills, end quote. A bilingual student is defined as a, quote, bilingual learner. It is, in a broad sense, a student who uses their first language at home or in the community and is learning through a second language, end quote. Sheltered English instruction is defined as, quote, an instructional approach used to make academic instruction in English understandable to ELL students. In the sheltered classroom, students are use physical activities, visual aids, and the environment to teach vocabulary for concept development in mathematics, science, social studies, and other subjects, end quote. Structured English immersion is, quote, means a classroom in which all of the students are limited English proficient as determined by the composite AZELLA test score, the AZELLA score of pre-emergent, emergent, basic, or intermediate, end quote. The AZELLA is the Arizona English Language Learner Assessment that helps educators determine how much English a student knows before going into the classroom to learn. Arizona's language development approach is based on four principles. All four of the principles are based on the exception that, quote, all educators share the responsibility for promoting the success of English learners, end quote. The four principles focus on, quote, asset-based behaviors and expectations, integrated instruction in disciplinary language and content, target and explicit language instruction, assessment, monitoring, and feedback, end quote. When teaching, all teachers in Arizona are expected to use those four principles when reaching and assessing students who are English language learners. The idea of student agency is for students to learn through experience and activities that are extremely meaningful and memorable. When teaching students who are ELL learners, it can be very difficult because there can be a pretty big language barrier at times. If a teacher makes lessons that are engaging, it will make the content more memorable and will help the student remember what they are learning. The first principle of Arizona's language development approach focuses on asset behavior and expectations. There is a list of teachers who can do this in the classroom to help behavioral expectations when there are ELL students in the classroom. An example is building and fostering strong family, community, and school partnership. Building a great relationship with an ELL student can be very helpful when teaching them the behaviors and expectations in the classroom. The second principle focuses on integrating instruction in disciplinary language and content. An example of this is, quote, model learning approaches so students can construct meaning using metacognition strategies, end quote. Department of Education, let's see here. When teaching students who are ELL learners, pictures and models are great ways to introduce a topic that is unfamiliar because ELL students will be able to connect with their learning more than they would be able to if they were learning by reading or speaking. The third principle looks at language instruction for students who are ELL students. One way teachers in Arizona focus on language in the classroom is provide age/grade level appropriate instruction and materials that are culturally and linguistically appropriate and aligned to the English language proficiency standards. When teachers are teaching students who are ELL learners, it is important to provide books and other reading materials that are at a level the particular student is reading at, so they are able to practice reading in the classroom. Lastly, the fourth principle looks at assessments, progress monitoring, and feedback. Arizona Department of Education recommends, quote, using student progress evidence to guide teachers and students' productive next steps to support both content learning and academic language development. This can be very helpful for a teacher to determine what they're going to teach and how they're going to teach it. This is important practice for all teachers to use with or without ELL students in their classroom, but it is even more important to drive instruction. The newcomer is a student who are, quote, any foreign-born students and their families who have recently arrived in the United States. They score in the pre-emergent to emergent range on the ASALH assessment and have been in the U.S. for less than 1 year. When a student qualifies as a newcomer, they are going to spend 120 minutes a school day of targeted instruction and another 120 minutes in that same school day of integrated instruction. A student who qualifies for the pull-out schedule is a lot like the newcomer schedule. The pull-out schedule requires students receive only 60 minutes of integrated instruction daily compared to the 120 minutes newcomer students require. A 2-hour student is a lot like the newcomer and pull-out student, but they only receive 120 minutes of integrated instruction throughout the school day. In the state of Arizona, there is an assessment that students who are ELL learners take to help teachers determine what a student knows. The Arizona Department of Education describes this assessment as the Arizona English Language Learner Assessment, the ASALH that we've already talked about, is a standards-based assessment that meets both state and federal requirements to measure students' English language proficiency. ASALH is used for both placement and reassessment purposes, end quote. As described, the nice thing that about the ASALH assessment is that it can be used as a placement assessment and can be also used as a reassessment. The Home Language Survey is a survey parents and guardians fill out to help the school determine the best program and or services of the student. Depending on the state, there are a number of accommodations that can be made for ELL students. The College Board has a list of accommodations that can be made available for students who are taking an assessment and qualify as an ELL student. The College Board can accommodate the following, quote, time and scheduling, setting, presentation, and response. So that can be, in a quiet room, certain parts of the day, extended time on tests, what the assessment looks like, and if you want to have a human scribe or things like that, College Board can accommodate that. The goal for all ELL students to achieve in every aspect of their life and learn as much as they can while they are still in school. With access to a list of accommodations, ELL students can be successful when taking assessments.